The mall was too bright. Not just the fluorescence glaring off the white tile, but the way everything gleamed. Mannequins with perfect limbs, glossy bags swinging from young wrists, the musical laughter of teenage girls bouncing like rubber balls off every marble wall. I stood beneath one of those brutal downlights in the Nordstrom changing room, the kind that exposes every fault like a courtroom cross-examination. I had brought in a soft lavender cardigan and a knee-length floral skirt, the kind of outfit women my age are expected to disappear into. The clerk had looked at me with a practiced smile when I asked for the size in petite. She didn't even check the racks, just told me, "If we don't have it out, we probably don't carry it." I didn't argue. You learn not to after a while. The mirror in the changing room was surrounded by light bulbs, like a starlet's vanity. But nothing felt glamorous. I stepped into the skirt, pulled it up over my hips and paused. My knees used to be smooth. Now they were maps, veins raised like roads, skin folded like time had stitched pleats into it. I adjusted the waistband, tugged gently at the elastic. It fit. Just barely. I reached for the cardigan, my arm trembling slightly as I pulled it over my blouse. The gesture caught my eye in the mirror. A woman I barely recognized blinked back at me, not because I didn't know her, but because I'd stopped looking at her a long time ago. Then it happened. Muffled voices outside the changing area. Teenage voices. Male, echoing off perfume counters and plastic bags. "Dude, she walks like a ghost," someone laughed. And then, "That's my grandma," Zach's voice followed. "Proud?" No, I'd know that tone anywhere. He wasn't proud, he was amused. A small burst of laughter. 3 boys, maybe 4. I imagined their postures, slouched, phones in hand, sneakers tapping impatient rhythms into the tile. The image was sharp, real. My breath didn't catch, not exactly. It slowed, froze, like winter before the snow falls. I didn't cry. I didn't flush with shame or rage. Instead, I stared at the reflection again. Closer now. The lighting above made harsh shadows under my eyes, deepening every crease. My lips had thinned over the years, the corners slightly downturned by default. I hadn't worn mascara in weeks, or was it months? I reached up, tugged a stray gray curl behind my ear. My ears were still pierced, but I hadn't worn earrings in over a year. A ghost. That's what he saw. A shape. A presence. Not a person. Not the woman who paid for his violin lessons, who sat through every third-grade spelling bee and kissed his forehead when he had a fever. Just a whisper behind him. Invisibility wasn't sudden. It was inherited. Generational. I watched my own mother fade after 60, her opinions laughed off, her body overlooked, her stories gently redirected into silence. She whispered less each year. And now here I was, a mirror image, only dimmer. But something shifted. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was a pulse, a spark in the chest, where identity had been sleeping. I had become so used to being useful that I forgot I had been someone before them. Before my husband, before Lindsay, before Zach. The door to the changing room creaked open a few inches. A younger woman peeked in. "Everything okay in there?" she asked. Her voice was polite, distant. I nodded. "Yes, thank you." She disappeared just as quickly. I turned back to the mirror. This time, I leaned in. One half of my face was shadowed from the light fixture directly above, creating a strange visual, a split version of me. The me they see. The me I used to be. I ran my fingers lightly down the neckline of the cardigan. This wasn't about a cardigan, or Zach, or even my knees. It was about the fact that I had allowed them, my husband, my daughter, my grandson, to draw the boundaries of who I was and what I was worth. And I had obeyed like it was a law. Zach had learned that dismissiveness somewhere. He didn't invent it. Lindsay had sharpened it, and my husband had modeled it. "Don't be dramatic," he used to say, tapping his newspaper. "You're not one of those hysterical types, thank God." I used to smile when he said that, smile and make dinner. Outside, I heard Zach's voice again. "She's taking forever." He wasn't even curious if I heard him. I slid off the cardigan and changed back into my clothes, slower this time. Not from fatigue, but deliberation. When I emerged from the changing room, Zach barely looked up from his phone. He was leaning against the wall, earbuds in, One foot crossed over the other like the mall owed him something. I didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, I walked past him, ghost-like if he insisted. But I took note of everything. The shape of his posture, the brand of his shoes, the receipts sticking out of the bag he held from the shoe store, the receipt I'd paid for. There would be no confrontation, not today. That's what they'd expect. A scolding, a speech. But I was done performing sadness. I would haunt differently, because ghosts don't disappear. They remember, they plan, and sometimes they return with keys no one thought they still had. Zach looked up. "Hey, did you find anything?" I turned just enough to meet his eyes. "Oh yes," I said, "something I didn't expect." Then I walked toward the exit, past the glowing storefronts and perfume-spritzed air. And in the silence behind me, I felt the first brick settle into place. Not for a grave, for a foundation. The house was too still, as if even the walls held their breath around me. I slipped off my shoes and walked across the kitchen floor, the tiles cool beneath my soles. Outside, a mockingbird chirped without pause, an uninvited commentary on the day. I didn't turn on any lights, let the house stay dim. I didn't need to see the dust to know it had settled. I went straight to the hallway closet, the one with the broken door hinge and the soft scent of cedar that still clung to the shelves from a decade-old sachet. That closet had always been mine, not in name, but in the way women claim small corners in homes that never really belonged to them. I reached up to the top shelf, pushing aside a rolled yoga mat I hadn't touched in years. Behind it, 2 boxes sat stacked like forgotten tombstones. Brown cardboard, edges soft from time, labeled in faded black marker. I pulled them down, one by one, and carried them to the dining table. The chair creaked under me as I sat. I ran my hands along the edge of the first box. My hands used to be prettier, thin fingers, painted nails. Now they told stories in every vein and callus. I opened the first box. There were photos at the top, Lindsay in braces, holding a science fair trophy, Zach as a toddler with cake smeared across his cheeks, me, always slightly out of focus in the background, always the one holding the camera or handing out juice boxes. I set the photos aside and pulled out a smaller folder underneath, the tab marked in my own handwriting. Zachary College. It was thick, heavier than I expected. Inside were rows of old check stubs, carbon copies of deposits I'd made into a 529 plan. My name was on every one. Eleanor Whitmore, in neat cursive. There were savings bonds, some going back 15 years, printouts of email exchanges with an academic advisor. I'd coordinated with his high school counselor when Lindsay was too busy to attend the meetings. The folders smelled like the attic, like mothballs and almosts. And I remembered, every Christmas I'd skip buying myself new shoes, every birthday card I'd slide a $100 bill into without being asked. I remembered Zach's 5th birthday party. Lindsay had said, "You're good at those grandma things. I'll just Venmo you for half." She never did. Flashbacks unspooled like old film, grainy, jump cut, sometimes out of order. Lindsay in college, storming into the house. "Why are you always on my back, Mom? You think feelings fix anything? I need solutions, not lectures." Eleanor, soft but firm. "I'm not on your back, sweetheart. I'm on your side." Lindsay, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, well, it feels the same." And another, Zach at 10, trying to explain why he hit another student. Lindsay yelling in the background. Eleanor kneeling, eye level, whispering, "You don't have to become someone you're afraid of." Zach blinking, but not answering. Then came the sharpest memory of all. In the kitchen, 2 decades ago. My husband, Richard, pouring coffee, steam rising like smoke. "You're coddling him," he said. "You're making him soft." "He's 10, I'd said quietly. "That's when it starts. Don't poison the boy with emotions." Poison, that's what he called kindness, what he called softness, compassion, vulnerability. I remembered how he always looked over financial documents like they were war maps, red pens circling and underlining. I used to ask questions until I learned not to. I returned to the folder. Every document had my name, my contributions, my plans. Not Lindsay's, not Richard's, mine. I placed the last page on the table, exhaling like I'd been underwater for years. I looked around at the house. The photos, the framed diplomas, the worn cushions on the couch. Everything I'd touched. Everything I'd paid for or preserved. And still, I was the ghost. I slid the folder back into the box, then reached for the second one. This one was older. It had belonged to Richard, mostly tax files, home deed copies, auto registrations. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A manila envelope marked, Whitmore Trust, 2013 revision. My pulse slowed, or maybe it spiked, I couldn't tell. I pulled it out and opened the clasp. Inside were printed pages, legal formatting, notarized seals. I scanned until I saw the words that dried my throat. Transfer of primary beneficiary rights from Eleanor Whitmore to Lindsay Whitmore, effective immediately upon agreement, signed below. The signature line bore my name, but I never signed it. It was dated 10 years ago. Richard's signature was there. Lindsay's too. My name had been traced. That's the only way to describe it. A forgery. They hadn't even bothered to make it convincing. They just assumed I'd never look. My mind reeled. 10 years of my own money rerouted. I had asked once, back then, about a smaller return on the joint account. Shifts in investment strategy, Richard had said, brushing toast crumbs off his lap. I nodded and washed the dishes. The silence wasn't my weakness. It was my weapon, dulled by years of disuse. Now I would sharpen it again. I placed the document on the table next to the folder marked Zachary. Side by side, legacy and betrayal, intent and theft. I stood up and walked to the mirror above the fireplace. They call it haunting when the dead return, I said aloud, voice even. I was never gone, just quiet. But not anymore. The law office hadn't changed much in 30 years. Same glass door with gold lettering that spelled out Grant and Holloway, LLP. Same chipped brick entryway and smell of legal dust, paper, cologne, and something vaguely like old furniture polish. The receptionist was new, of course, younger than Zach. She glanced up, half interested, tapping her nails on the keyboard. Do you have an appointment? I called yesterday, I said, offering a smile I'd once perfected for school secretaries and bridal shop attendants. To see Mr. Holloway. She scanned her monitor. Oh, right. You're Mrs. Whitmore? Eleanor, I said. Yes. She stood. He'll be with you shortly. You can wait in the lounge. Lounge was generous. It was a room with 2 chairs, a coffee machine that made watery espresso, and magazines that hadn't been touched since the last administration. I didn't sit. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out over the street I'd driven on 1,000 times as a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but never as a client. A door opened behind me. Eleanor, came a voice too loud and too slow, like someone speaking to a child or a confused tourist. Come in, come in. Charles Holloway looked exactly as I remembered. His hair had thinned to a gray crown, but he still wore those tortoiseshell glasses that made him look more intellectual than he was. His tie was crooked, his handshake soft. He guided me into his office with both hands, one on my shoulder, one gesturing toward the leather chair across from his. The office was cramped and dark. A single golden desk lamp illuminated the polished wood in front of him. The shelves behind were cluttered with law books, dusty awards, and framed photos of his sailboat. Well, he said, settling in, this is a surprise. I didn't expect to see you again. Everything's been in order since Richard's passing. I folded my hands on my lap. I'd like to review the trust documents. All of them, especially the revisions from the last 15 years. His eyebrows lifted. You're still keeping up with all that? Still. It hung in the air like a dropped coin. I was always keeping up, I said. I just wasn't consulted. He chuckled in that grating, dismissive way men do when they think you've said something cute. Well, Richard had a strong hand in managing the estate. You know, most of our older clients prefer not to, how shall I put it, overcomplicate things. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that meant, why now? I didn't answer his unspoken question. I'd like to see every update, every allocation, every change in beneficiary designation. I'll wait if it needs to be printed. Charles laced his fingers together. This isn't about the house, is it, or Lindsay's portion? Because I can assure you, Eleanor, everything was done by the book. The book has margins, I replied, and I'd like to read the footnotes. His mouth twitched, half smile, half warning. He turned to his computer and began typing with 2 fingers slowly. While he worked, I looked around. The lamp on the desk cast warm light over a stack of files, untouched, unread. It reminded me of the lamp my father used when he taught me to balance checkbooks and log petty cash in his hardware store. I was 15. Numbers had made sense then, before emotion was taught to override reason. I remembered his voice. Don't let anyone tell you what a dollar's worth unless you counted it first. But I'd stopped counting when I married Richard. He took over the finances like a king assuming a throne, and I let him. I traded math for recipes, ledgers for carpool rotations. Now I missed the precision. Charles printed the packet and slid it across the desk. You'll see it's all perfectly legitimate. The packet was thick. I flipped through it slowly, each page a reminder of how many decisions had been made without me. Richard's name appeared a dozen times. Lindsay's, more. My name, when it showed up, was always at the bottom. An afterthought, an assumption. There it was again. The same document I'd found at home, 2013 revision. But this time it had a notary stamp. My fingers paused on the page. Who notarized this? Deborah, our in-house notary. She passed last year. Did she ever verify the signatures? He leaned back, frowning. Of course, that was her job. My signature's a forgery, I said, not looking up. She couldn't have verified something I never gave. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, that's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, I said. It's a fact. I'm telling you I didn't sign this. He exhaled. Eleanor, do you really want to dredge all this up? At your stage in life, it's better to focus on comfort and legacy. Stirring old waters only muddies things. There it was. Again. Your stage in life. Another way to say you've expired. But I'd never been clearer. I stood and slid the document back across the desk. Legacy is exactly what I'm here for. Just not theirs. He nodded once, tersely. Well, if you're looking for legal recourse, I'll have to refer you elsewhere. I'm not here for recourse, I said. I'm here to count what's mine, and to decide what's next. I left the office without shaking his hand. As I stepped out onto the street, sunlight hit the pavement like a spotlight. The sounds of the town felt louder. Cars, birds, a dog barking from a second-story window. I had always been someone who paid attention to the details. I just hadn't been allowed to finish the math. Now I would, because the ledger of the living still had columns open, and I was ready to balance them myself. Raising Lindsay had always felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of mirrors. I was constantly adjusting, my tone, my words, even my silence, to reflect the kind of mother I thought she wanted, or at least wouldn't reject. When she was a child, I bent myself into storybook shapes, cheerful, organized, careful not to overwhelm. But she never needed softness. She needed success. And I was never dressed for it. I wore cardigans when other mothers wore blazers, brought brownies when they brought resumes. My affection embarrassed her, and my apologies outnumbered my questions. Over time, I shrank, not from neglect, but from obedience. I watched Lindsay grow into someone sharp-edged and self-sufficient. She called her father the realist, and me, sentimental. She absorbed his philosophies like gospel. And when Zach was born, she passed them down like heirlooms. There was a winter afternoon that still sticks in my ribs like a cold breath. Zach was 12, maybe 13. He'd come home from soccer with grass stains on his knees and blood on his uniform. Lindsay was already in the kitchen, wine glass in hand, scrolling on her phone with the kind of detachment that never quite looked intentional. He got into a fight, she said flatly, as if it were a weather report. Coach said he handled it. Boys'll be boys. I took the uniform into the laundry room. I scrubbed at the blood with a bar of soap, red streaks swirling in the water like accusation. The door was ajar. I could hear Lindsay sigh, annoyed at a text message. Then she said it, without venom, just observation. You're not like the moms on TV. She said it like a diagnosis, not harsh, not cruel, just true to her. And in that moment, I realized I had always been something she needed to correct. Now sitting across from her in her polished kitchen, white counters, industrial stove, marble backsplash, I saw no trace of the girl who used to cry when she skinned her knees. Only a woman hardened by control, parenting as performance. Zach wasn't home. He was at a friend's house, apparently working on a college scholarship essay. Lindsay had invited me for coffee under the guise of casual connection, but the dorm deposit form lay between us on the table like an open demand. I thought you'd already covered part of it, she said, spooning oat milk into her mug. I did, I replied. Over the last 17 years. Lindsay didn't look up. I meant recently. I'm not contributing anymore, I said, my voice level. She finally met my eyes. Excuse me? I nodded toward the form. You have the income, the resources. He's your son. She set the mug down. I can't believe you're making this a thing. It's already a thing, I said. You just didn't expect me to notice. Is this about the lawyer? Her tone shifted, tightening. You really want to go digging up old documents and causing drama at your age? There it was again. That quiet cruelty wrapped in politeness. At your age. As if curiosity had an expiration date. I'm not causing drama, I said. I'm reading the story you wrote. I just never realized I was the one funding it. A long pause settled between us. You know, she said finally, you were always too emotional. It's exhausting. Zach doesn't need that. No, I said. He needs someone who won't cry when he erases her. She didn't flinch, just sipped her coffee and changed the subject. After I left, I walked home slowly. The sky was the color of bruised lavender, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. I stepped through the door and dropped my keys on the hallway table. I stood in the silence for a while. Then I picked up the drawer organizer from my bedroom dresser, the one filled with mismatched phone chargers, dead batteries, and ancient earbuds. At the bottom, beneath a crumpled warranty card, was my old iPhone 4. I hadn't used it since Richard passed. The battery was dead, but I still had the charger. I plugged it in, and after a few moments the screen flickered to life. Old apps, old wallpaper, and a voice memo icon with a red badge, one unplayed. Curious, I tapped it. The file was dated October 18th, 2012. I pressed play. At first, static, then voices, faint but familiar. Don't ask her, Richard said, chuckling. She's good for casseroles, not capital. A laugh. Lindsay's. And then Zach, younger, tentative. But she's smart, right? Richard again. She's sweet. That's not the same thing. Another laugh. This time sharper. Lindsay's voice. She thinks college savings grow on love. I hit pause. My chest felt hollow, not broken, emptied, not even about what they'd said, but that they'd said it to each other, in front of Zach. That they made my silence into a punchline, my support into parody. It had never been about love. It had been legacy theft, rewriting my role until I was just a signature, a wallet, a witness. But I had the recording now, and I had finally stopped whispering. It started with a book, a tattered paperback copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, the pages browned at the edges like leaves pressed between childhood journals. I hadn't opened it in years. I'd picked it up again out of habit, an attempt to escape the echo of Lindsay's words, and the recording still clinging to my thoughts like smoke. As I flipped through the pages, something slipped out. A folded sheet of notepad paper, my handwriting. The ink faded, but still legible. I unfolded it slowly. Dear Ellie, you don't need to apologize for asking questions. You're not difficult. You're not needy. You're trying to understand, and that doesn't make you a burden. Say what you want to say. Not everything has to come with a smile. It wasn't dated, but I knew when I wrote it. Somewhere between Richard's first affair and Lindsay's first semester. I had written it late at night in the laundry room, the one place I could close the door and not be questioned. I sat down on the edge of the bed, that old letter trembling in my hands, and read it aloud. The sound of my own voice startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I had spoken to myself, rather than muttering out of frustration or whispering out of habit. I began pulling more books from the shelf. The bell jar. Their eyes were watching God, Little Women. Each one held a piece of me, not just in the stories, but literally. Pages tucked between chapters, tiny folded corners, letters hidden like pressed secrets. Ellie, I'm proud of you for not raising your voice, even when they tried to silence you anyway. You don't have to prove your worth by staying quiet. Love does not mean being invisible. The letters weren't eloquent. They were raw, rushed, half-thoughts scribbled when there was no one else to hear them. Some ended mid-sentence. Some were just bullet points. A few were stained with what I could only guess were tears or coffee or both. And yet, they felt like artifacts. Evidence that somewhere beneath the years of compliance, I had always known. I had always felt the wrongness, even if I didn't speak it aloud. Flashbacks came in waves. Lindsay's 13th birthday. I had planned a small dinner at her favorite diner, decorated a booth with balloons, ordered the cake she loved. She showed up late with her best friend, rolled her eyes at the decorations, and asked, "Did you really think I still liked strawberry frosting?" My 50th birthday. Richard bought me a vacuum. "You said you needed one," he explained without irony. The Christmas Lindsay gave me a scented candle and laughed, "You always say you want to relax. Now you can smell like it too." Each memory played like a home movie with the sound turned down. Just faces, expressions, gestures, and me in the corner, holding the camera, holding my tongue. There were so many versions of me I never spoke back to. So many moments I let slide like soft snow, thinking it was better to keep the peace. But now, I wasn't writing to myself anymore. Now I was writing to Zach. I opened a clean notebook and turned to the first page. The pen trembled slightly in my hand, not from nerves, but anticipation. Dear Zach, I'm writing this not because you asked me to, but because you never did. I paused, then continued. There are things you deserve to know. Not about inheritance or college funds or even mistakes, but about who I was, who I am, and what it cost to become both. I wrote for an hour, then another. The words came in pieces, not perfect, but honest. I told him about how I used to dream of becoming a travel writer before I met his grandfather, about how I gave up that dream one compromise at a time. I told him how I used to sing in the kitchen while cooking dinner for Lindsay, and how Richard would turn up the television so he wouldn't have to hear me. I told him how I stayed, not out of weakness, but out of hope. Hope that one day they would see me. Not just what I did, but me. I wrote about the time he fell off his bike, and Lindsay refused to take off work to come to the hospital. How I sat with him until morning, reading him old stories and holding his hand as he slept. How he whispered, "I love you, Grandma," and how I didn't cry until I got home. I didn't blame him. Not directly. That wasn't the point. These weren't accusations. They were invitations. To remember, to see clearly, to know. I tore the pages neatly from the notebook and slid them into a manila envelope. On the front, I wrote, "To be read in order." And then I kept writing, a new letter every day. Each one a portrait of memory. Each one a revision of the story they thought they knew. I wasn't writing to change Zach. I wasn't even writing to forgive Lindsay or resurrect Richard's name from the muck of betrayal. I was writing because I finally believed my voice was worth hearing, even if it came in ink instead of thunder. These were the letters I never sent, until now. Zach arrived unannounced, just after noon. I heard his car before I saw him, an overly loud muffler pulling into my driveway like it owned the pavement. The knock on my door wasn't impatient, but it wasn't gentle either. When I opened it, he stood with one hand gripping his phone, the other tucked into the pocket of a university hoodie. The fabric still looked new, like ambition trying to pass for certainty. "Hey, Grandma," he said, offering that casual grin I'd seen work on his teachers, friends' mothers, and baristas alike. I stepped aside. "Come in." He entered like it was a favor to me, like his presence was enough. He sat on the edge of the couch, phone still in hand, legs spread wide the way Richard used to sit, posture careless, unaware of the space he consumed. "So," he began, "I talked to Mom. She said you're holding back on helping with the tuition deposit." I didn't reply. "She's kind of stressed," he added, as if that were my responsibility. I moved to the sideboard and poured tea, one cup for myself. I didn't offer him any. Instead, I held it between both hands and looked at the steam curling in the sunlight. The cup was chipped near the rim, stained inside from decades of use. It was my favorite. Not because it was beautiful, but because it had survived. "I'm not refusing," I said. "I'm revising." He blinked. "Revising what?" "The conditions." Zach let out a short laugh. "There are conditions now?" "There always were. You just never noticed." He shifted in his seat. "Okay, what are they?" I walked to the small desk in the corner and retrieved a white envelope. Inside was a check, enough to cover the first semester's deposit. I set it on the table in front of him. "You'll get the rest, bit by bit," I said, "but only if you read one letter from me, every week, in order." He stared at the envelope, then at me. "Seriously?" "I've written things I want you to know. About your family, about your history, about me." He scoffed. "This some memoir project? It's context. I said. "You want my money. I want you to have my truth." Zach picked up the envelope and studied the seal like it might bite him. "This is kind of weird," he muttered. "Maybe, but it's honest." His shoulders dropped slightly, eyes darting to his phone. "Okay, fine. Letters for cash. Got it." He shoved the envelope into his backpack, and I watched him walk toward the door, shoulders forward, gait slightly cocky, phone already back in his hand. And just before he reached the threshold, I saw it, the exact posture Richard used to have, that same unearned certainty, that belief that everything waited for him to ask. But Zach didn't inherit that by accident. He learned it from Lindsay, from Richard, from me, through silence, through compliance, through sacrifice dressed as love. When the door closed behind him, I stood still for a long time, staring at the place where his shoes had scuffed the floor. Then I returned to my desk. Letter 1 was already written. "Zach, you were born on a Sunday morning. I remember because I had just ironed Lindsay's dress for a work event she missed. She blamed the pregnancy. I sat in the hospital waiting room while Richard made calls about a stock split. I was the first person to hold you. Your mom was asleep. Your grandfather was annoyed. You were so quiet, I thought you were already disappointed in us." I kept writing. Each letter peeled back a layer. Not to wound, but to reveal. "The first time you cried in my arms, I told you, I'll always protect you." I didn't realize that would mean from your own inheritance of entitlement. "You know who taught me how to balance a checkbook? My father. You know who told me to forget that skill? Your grandfather." The words came easier now. Truth was like water when the dam broke. Every sacrifice I made, every dinner reheated, every weekend spent babysitting so Lindsay could chase something shinier. Every apology I whispered for the sake of peace. It was all in the letters. I wasn't just writing my version of history, I was reclaiming authorship. A week later, I received an email. Subject line, admissions review notification. Zachary Whitmore. I clicked it. His university was investigating allegations of academic dishonesty. An anonymous party had submitted screenshots of AI-generated essays and flagged suspicious test activity. His admission was temporarily revoked pending investigation. I sat back in my chair. The copies had come from my printer. The forwarded email from a throwaway account. I had no interest in watching him fail, but I had no interest in letting him fake his way through legacy. They taught him how to lie with confidence. I was teaching him how to face the consequences. It fell out from between the pages of a dictionary I hadn't opened in years. A photograph, square-edged and sun-warped, curled at the corners like it had waited too long to be remembered. In it, I was 19. The sky behind me stretched wide and cloudless over a jagged ridgeline. My cheeks were flushed with wind, my arms raised in a half-triumphant, half-shy wave. I wore hiking boots and a windbreaker 2 sizes too big, cinched awkwardly at the waist with a borrowed belt. My hair was wild. My eyes were louder than the smile. I looked alive. I turned the photo over. In faded ink it read, "Blue Ridge Trail, summer 1969, before Richard, before Lindsay." Before I began saying yes, out of habit instead of desire, I sat on the edge of the bed and studied the image until my fingers began to ache from holding it so tight. The next morning, I pulled a duffel bag from the hall closet. I packed a water bottle, a small thermos of tea, a paperback novel, and the boots I hadn't worn since before Zach was born. The soles had dried and cracked along the edges, but the laces still remembered how to hold. I folded the photograph and tucked it into my inside coat pocket. Before I zipped the bag shut, I added a single-page letter, addressed to Zach. Before I disappear, I must remember where I began. Not for nostalgia, for inventory, for proof that I lived as more than what I gave away. I left it on the kitchen table next to the bowl of apples he liked to ignore when he visited. The drive to the mountains was longer than I remembered. Or maybe my memory had shrunk the distance to keep it within reach. The road curved like a long exhale through pine-covered hills and old barns leaning into their final seasons. I kept the windows cracked and let the cold air sting my cheeks. It was the kind of pain that reminded you, you're not done feeling. When I reached the trailhead, the lot was mostly empty. A single van. A map posted on a wooden board. The trees rustled like old secrets being passed between branches. I stood for a moment before stepping onto the dirt path. My knees protested, but they moved, slowly, deliberately. The climb was steeper than I remembered. The incline pressed against my thighs like gravity had a grudge. I stopped often. Not because I couldn't keep going, but because I wanted to notice. The moss growing on a split log, the faded initials carved into bark, the sound of distant water chasing stones. Halfway up, I paused at a curve and sat on a flat rock. I pulled out the thermos and drank slowly, watching clouds shift over the valley below. My breath rose in visible threads, disappearing before they were finished, just like so many sentences I'd swallowed over the years. After a while, I heard footsteps, crunching gravel, purposeful but unhurried. A woman appeared around the bend, late 60s, maybe older, wind-burned cheeks, salt-white hair tied back with a paisley scarf. She wore a denim jacket covered in iron-on patches and carried a leather notebook in one hand. She smiled when she saw me. "Not many come up here alone." "Not many remember they used to," I replied. She chuckled, easing herself down beside me. "I'm Margot," she said, extending a hand. "Eleanor." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. She opened her notebook and scribbled something down, then glanced over. "You look like a woman who's rewriting something." "Maybe I am," I said. "Or maybe I'm just trying to remember the original draft." Margot nodded slowly, closing her notebook. "I host a writing group, widows mostly, women who used to write but stopped, or women who never started because they weren't allowed to say anything that didn't end in a casserole." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was too familiar. She studied me a moment longer. "If we don't haunt them, they bury us." I looked at her. "Excuse me?" "It's the truth," she said, shrugging. "They write the story. We vanish between paragraphs unless we leave a mess behind." I sipped the last of my tea. "Then I guess I've been leaving footprints." She smiled. "Good. Now leave a trail." We didn't exchange numbers. We didn't make promises. But when we stood and parted ways at the fork in the trail, I felt lighter. Not because the mountain had changed, but because I had. At the summit, I pulled out the photograph and held it beside my face. The wind caught it, and for a moment I thought it might fly away. But I held on, because now I knew exactly where I'd started. And I wasn't done arriving yet. The city felt louder than before. Not in sound, but in speed. Horns still honked, storefronts still buzzed with fluorescent hum, and people still crossed streets like they were being chased by time. But something had shifted. Or maybe I had. I carried my notebook tucked beneath one arm and a flyer in my coat pocket. It was hand-folded and printed on cheap pastel paper. Writing for women over 50, no experience needed. Wednesdays. Community Center Room 204. I'd found it taped to a bulletin board near the grocery store, half covered by a missing cat notice. Room 204 was up a flight of chipped stairs that smelled like floor polish and something vaguely floral. The hallway was lined with finger-painted art and fundraising posters for school supply drives. I arrived 10 minutes early. The door was ajar. Inside, folding chairs arranged in a loose circle, mismatched cushions offering minimal comfort. A woman with short gray hair and an armful of bracelets was setting out plastic cups and a tray of grocery store cookies. "You here for the group?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, first time," she smiled, warm but brisk. "Grab a seat, Eleanor." "I'm Janelle." More women trickled in, 10, maybe 12 in total. Some wore jeans and windbreakers, others skirts and orthopedic shoes. One woman was in a janitor's uniform, name tag still clipped to her chest. There was laughter, casual chatter. It didn't feel like therapy. It felt like air, breathable. We were asked to write for 15 minutes. Prompt, a moment you disappeared. My pen moved before I gave it permission. "He told me not to speak during business dinners. I obeyed. He said feelings weren't facts. I agreed. My daughter learned how to look through me by age 9. My grandson learned to forget I was there by 12. I didn't read that entry aloud. Not yet. But I came back the next week, and the week after. Each session, the women read their lives out loud. As if truth were wine, and we'd been saving bottles for a wake that never came. One by one, stories poured out. Marriages survived, children lost, bodies betrayed, dreams postponed until they curdled. I started bringing older notebooks, letters, pages I'd never meant to share. I read them with a steady voice and no apology. My husband once said I was good with soft things, babies, blankets, silence. I let him believe that. But softness is not the absence of strength, it's the proof you survived impact. They listened, they nodded, sometimes they cried. One afternoon, I read a piece about Zach, about the violin recitals, the time I stitched his Halloween costume by hand while Lindsay was away on a business trip, the scraped knees he forgot I bandaged. He doesn't remember. But memory isn't what makes something real. Survival does. Flashbacks came easily now, woven between paragraphs like thread through a quilt. I didn't need to dramatize them. The ache was already there, soft and firm, like old bruises remembered by the bone. After 4 weeks, Janelle pulled me aside and asked if I'd ever considered publishing. I laughed too sharply. It's not writing, I told her. It's remembering. She shrugged. Sometimes that's the most dangerous kind. That night, I sat at my computer and opened a blank blog. I didn't use my name, I didn't post a photo, I simply titled it, Inheritance of Silence. The first entry was short. They say ghosts fade, but I was never gone. I was edited out. Here's the unabridged version. Each post was a memory, a letter, a reckoning. I wrote about the forged documents, the dinner parties where I was the help, not the guest, the cardigan I wore to Zach's graduation while Lindsay rolled her eyes because it wasn't elegant enough. The blog gained readers quietly. I never advertised, never commented. But the view count crept upward, a few comments here and there. Women saying, I thought I was the only one. That was enough. Until the night of the family dinner. It was Lindsay's birthday. She insisted on a low-key event, which meant catered food, linen napkins, and place cards with calligraphy. I wore navy. Quiet, dignified. I brought a bottle of wine and my restraint. Halfway through the meal, while Zach scrolled on his phone and Lindsay recounted her new work-from-home setup, she turned to me with a glint in her eye that I recognized from childhood tantrums. So, she said, loud enough to cut the room's chatter, you're a blogger now? I looked up, fork paused mid-air. Excuse me? She pulled out her phone and tapped it a few times. Inheritance of silence, she said, smirking. Catchy. Though I guess passive aggression runs deep in our bloodline. Silence fell over the table. I set my fork down gently. You read it then? Read it? I recognized it. Every character's a thin disguise. You think I wouldn't see myself in your martyr monologues? Zach looked up, startled. It's not fiction, I said calmly. Oh, please. She waved her hand. You've turned your grievances into gospel. You want to be a ghost so badly? Fine. Haunt away. I leaned forward slightly. My voice dropped, but every word landed sharp. I didn't write to shame you, Lindsay. I wrote because I'm tired of disappearing inside your version of the story. She stared at me, stunned. I was there. Every recital, every scraped knee, every forgotten birthday where I still baked a cake. Zach looked between us. Wait, what is this? Lindsay ignored him. You made me look cruel. No, I said. You did that. I just turned the light on. The room stayed frozen for a beat too long. Then someone coughed. A fork scraped a plate. Zach stood up and walked out without a word. I didn't follow. Later that night, back home, I opened the blog and posted a new entry. They found the mirror. They didn't like the reflection. Ghosts don't vanish, they evolve. The country club was all polished surfaces and polite conversation, the kind of place that turned sharpness into decorum and disdain into wine pairings. I hadn't been there in over a decade, since Richard's retirement luncheon, where I was thanked for supporting his journey as if I'd been a seat cushion instead of a partner. I arrived at exactly 4 p.m., stepping from the rideshare car with a firm grip on my clutch and my spine held straight. The valet took one look at me, red dress, silver heels, not an inch of apology, and smiled like I didn't need his approval. He wasn't wrong. The dress was a bold choice. Not youthful, but undeniable. It cinched at the waist and draped just enough to remind everyone that grace could age without fading. I hadn't worn red since before Lindsay was born. It felt like reclaiming a language I'd forgotten I spoke. Inside, the reunion buzzed with distant relatives, plastic smiles, and the clinking of glasses. Lindsay had outdone herself. White tablecloths, custom name cards, a live quartet playing standards no one really listened to. The room smelled of eucalyptus and intention. I walked toward the center of the room, heels soft against the carpet, and felt eyes turn. Some squinted in recognition, others widened in disbelief. Zach stood near the punch bowl, phone in hand, chatting with cousins. He looked up, saw me, and did a double take, then quickly looked away. Lindsay approached, holding a champagne flute like a weapon. Wow, she said. You really wore that. I offered a pleasant smile. Yes, it still fits. She took a sip, eyes scanning me. You've been busy lately? I have. Blogging, dressing like the matriarch in a Netflix drama? I tilted my head. Is that a compliment? It's a spectacle, she replied, voice sharp. This was supposed to be about the family, not your rebranding. Her voice carried just enough for nearby guests to catch the tone. I didn't flinch. I'm part of the family, just not the footnote anymore. Lindsay's lips thinned. You humiliated me. I told the truth. You made me look like the villain. You made yourself look like the only character. She laughed, brittle and empty. You think quoting old letters and airing private moments makes you brave? You're a blogger with a grudge. Congratulations. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean in. You called me a ghost, I said. But I wrote your history. For a moment, everything went still, like the room was holding its breath. Zach turned from the drink table, watching us now. His face was unreadable. Embarrassment, confusion, maybe regret. But he didn't move. He just looked. I gave you everything, Lindsay hissed. Time, patience, my son. I raised an eyebrow. You gave me responsibility, then blamed me for being tired. She blinked. Once, twice. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded index card. On it was a passage from the blog, handwritten in ink the color of garnets. Silence isn't sainthood, it's suppression. And when it ends, it doesn't explode, it echoes. Through children, through legacies, through the stories they thought would stay buried. I handed her the card. Put that in the scrapbook, I said. It might be the most honest thing in it. A waiter passed by. I took a glass of water from his tray and nodded graciously. Then I walked away. I passed Zach on my way to the exit. He didn't speak, but his mouth twitched. Caught between apology and defense, I paused just long enough to say, you can read the rest, or you can keep pretending, but don't confuse my absence for weakness. And I left. No tears, no apology. Just the echo of heels and the scent of someone who had finally stopped shrinking to fit. The dining table hadn't been used for meals in months. Not really. It had become my command center, where I wrote, sorted, remembered. The surface was scratched and uneven, light catching along the grooves of time, but it held weight like an old spine. I placed a new folder at the center, a fresh manila shell with a single word written across the front in black ink, release. Inside, I slid every receipt, every photocopied check, every line item from Zach's college fund I had personally funded over the years. Camp registration forms, piano lesson invoices, early deposits into his 529 account, even the envelopes marked birthday with my handwriting on the back, in cursive no one uses anymore. The stack grew heavy, tangible, like proof of a life rendered invisible through the very labor that made it possible. I flipped through them slowly, breathing in the papery scent of years gone unnoticed. There were statements dating back to 2008, one from a children's clothing store, where I'd bought Zach his first winter coat. Another from the summer Lindsay said she was too swamped to plan a birthday party, so I'd hosted one in my backyard, complete with a SpongeBob cake I'd made myself. The receipt from the bakery was still stapled to the RSVP list I never threw away. I didn't cry. It wasn't grief. It was accounting. Each document added to the quiet dignity of detachment. These pages weren't just numbers. They were hours of waiting in lobbies, canceled lunch plans, forgotten holidays, late-night trips to pharmacies and early morning school drop-offs when Lindsay had to catch a flight. But now, there would be no more line items. I called a lawyer the following Monday, a woman this time. When I told her what I needed, she paused on the phone before saying, "That's unusual, but not unreasonable." Within a week, I was in her office, signing forms to officially remove my name from any custodial obligations, financial guarantees, or future disbursements tied to Zachary Whitmore. "I just want it on record," I told her, "that the ledger is closed." She nodded without judgment, sliding the final paper across the desk. "Do you want a copy?" "I'll keep one," I said, "for the folder." That night, I placed it at the very top of release. Then I opened a new envelope. Inside, I tucked a check for $0, formatted like every other one I had written over the years, signed, dated, numbered, and beneath it, I added a single-page letter, written in the same cursive Zach once told me looked like those fancy restaurant menus. Zach, this is my last contribution. Not because I no longer care, but because I finally do. About myself, about boundaries, about truth. You are free to rewrite your future, but not on the back of a woman you refuse to see. Whatever you become next, let it be yours. Not mine in disguise. Love, Grandma. I sealed it and addressed the front in block letters, just like I used to when he was little and couldn't yet read cursive. Then I mailed it. No return address, no expectations. I didn't wait for a response. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th day, I imagined him receiving it. No dialogue, no narration. Just him at the kitchen counter, peeling open the envelope. His fingers pausing on the check, confused. His eyes scanning the letter. The quiet stretching between realization and comprehension. Whatever happened next wasn't mine to shape. Weeks later, I received an email from a former writing group member. Did you know one of your blog entries was quoted in a college writing prompt response? She asked. The student said it inspired his whole application. I found the article she linked. The school had launched a creative writing mentorship for non-traditional students. One applicant wrote about a series of personal letters from a grandmother who refused to be erased. No name was mentioned, just initials, ZW. I closed my laptop. In the silence, I thought of Zach. Not the boy I raised in shadows, not the young man who mimicked his mother's dismissal, but the one who, at 5, once asked me to tell him a real bedtime story. One I made up. Just for him. Maybe this was the one. And maybe now he'd start telling his own. The invitation arrived in an envelope marked, Local Voices, Speak Your Truth. The handwriting was loopy, penned in purple ink, and the return address listed the community center 3 blocks from my house. I'd passed that building 1,000 times. Brick and windowless, squat between a laundromat and an abandoned florist. I never once thought of it as a stage. The letter was simple. We've been reading your blog. Would you consider speaking at our Women's Stories night? Small crowd, big hearts. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I said yes. The event was held on a Friday evening, just as the sun dipped low enough to make the parking lot shimmer with warmth. The community center's gym smelled faintly of old basketballs and pine sol. Folding chairs were arranged in crooked rows beneath buzzing lights. A folding table at the entrance held a tin of cookies, a coffee pot, and a stack of hand-labeled name tags. I didn't take a tag. I didn't need one. The microphone screeched slightly as the organizer, a woman named Sheila with frizzy red hair and a clipboard too big for her frame, adjusted it to height. Next, she announced, we're honored to have a writer who's been unearthing silence with fierce honesty. Eleanor, would you join us? There was polite applause, maybe 30 people, mostly women, mostly older. A few younger ones near the back. One teenage girl in a hoodie, earbuds hanging from her collar, arms folded in practiced detachment. I stepped up, the mic warm under the lights, the metal stand wobbling just slightly as I positioned my pages. The silence before I began felt heavy, but inviting. I unfolded a single sheet of paper. I'd like to read a piece titled She Walks Like a Ghost. A soft murmur rippled through the chairs. Some leaned forward, others stilled. I read slowly. No dramatics, just truth, line by line. She walks like a ghost, they said. But ghosts don't cook your dinner. Ghosts don't wipe noses, fund futures, or hold your secrets in the dark. Ghosts don't stay silent because they're weak. They stay silent because they remember everything and no one asked. But ask, and you might hear the sound of history whispering back, I was here, I gave, I mattered. I paused at the final sentence. The room was still. Some faces were wet with tears. Others were unreadable, rigid, processing, remembering. A woman in the 3rd row clapped first, then another, then a chorus, soft and slow. No whistles, no cheers, just gratitude wrapped in palms. I stepped away from the mic, paper still in hand, breath caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. Afterward, as the chairs scraped back and the cookie tin emptied, a few women approached me. One told me she'd never written anything but grocery lists, but tonight she might try a poem. Another said her mother died before ever telling her how she really felt about being a wife. They thanked me for saying something they thought couldn't be said without burning bridges. And then the girl in the hoodie stepped forward. She looked to be about 16, maybe 17, hair in a messy ponytail, sleeves pulled over her knuckles. She didn't say anything at first. Then, barely above a whisper, "You sound like my grandma used to," before she stopped talking. The words hit with the weight of generations. I set down my paper and opened my arms. She stepped into them like she'd been waiting. Not a polite hug, not a quick squeeze, a real hug. The kind that tells you someone else understands what hasn't been said aloud. I didn't ask her name. I didn't have to. We stood like that for a while, the buzz of overhead lights fading into nothing. And in that moment, I realized this was the legacy I wanted. Not money, not monuments, just memory, passed down like a story too strong to be silenced. The mall was exactly as I remembered it. Same polished floors that glinted under artificial light. Same piped-in music humming from ceiling speakers. A melody that sounded vaguely familiar but impossible to name. Same store windows with mannequins frozen in mid-stride, wrapped in colors not made for women like me. I sat on the same bench outside the Nordstrom fitting rooms, the one near the indoor planter shaped like a half moon. It had been nearly a year since Zach made the ghost comment, nearly a lifetime since I first gave parts of myself away in here. Now I watched. Two women my age walked by slowly, linked arms, their laughter real and unbothered. One carried a bright pink bag and wore leopard print flats that matched nothing but her mood. They paused near the makeup counter, pointed at something, laughed again. One of them dabbed perfume on her wrist. No one scolded them. No one looked twice. Another woman, alone, hunched forward in a wheelchair pushed by a younger man. Her sweater was buttoned unevenly, her eyes fixed on the floor. He spoke to her without turning around, distracted by his phone. She nodded at nothing. Some grandmothers laughed, some disappeared. I pulled my coat tighter and stood. The same store stood in front of me, Nordstrom. Same mannequins, same dressing room where my grandson's words first shattered something I didn't know could break further. But now the floor didn't feel so slick beneath me. My spine held straighter. My chin didn't dip to avoid eye contact. And when I passed by the mirrored columns near the perfume counter, I didn't look away. I looked, not for flaws, but for proof that I had survived. At the edge of the atrium, beside the bookstore, I stopped at the donor wall, an electronic screen that rotated through names of those who had contributed to the new educational wing being built downtown. It had been a quiet initiative, mostly funded by corporations and board members. But now, my name would be there too. I had signed the paperwork earlier that morning at the foundation office. The grant was small to start, $10,000, but it was enough to seed something. The plaque would read, "The Eleanor Whitmore Grant for Women, 60 plus, returning to school." Not because they were told to, because they choose to. It wasn't in Zach's name. It wasn't in Lindsay's. It wasn't in memory of my husband, or stitched into a quilt of legacy created by someone else's design. It was mine, earned, etched, living. I took a seat in the food court and pulled out my small leather-bound notebook. Inside were the names of 5 women who had already inquired about the grant. One wanted to finish her GED, one wanted to study horticulture, one had dreams of opening her own bakery and needed help navigating community college enrollment. They weren't looking to reclaim the past. They were building something entirely new. A little girl passed by with her grandmother, hand in hand. The child's hair was in 2 lopsided braids, her cheeks sticky from ice cream. She pointed to the fountain in the center of the atrium, the one with the copper coins sunk at the bottom like rusted wishes. "Can we throw one in?" she asked. The grandmother dug into her purse, handed her a penny. The girl closed her eyes and tossed it with ceremony. "I wished for a story," she whispered. I smiled. It felt right, because some of us are born knowing how to tell them. Some of us learn by listening, and some of us wait years for the silence to clear. I rose from the bench, stepped toward the exit, heels clicking against the tile, steady, certain. No longer background, no longer edited, no longer a ghost. And as I pushed open the door, the cold air met my skin like breath. Final monologue, soft but certain. They said I walked like a ghost. I suppose I did. Quiet, careful, unseen. But now I haunt with purpose. And I keep walking, because I am still here. If this story echoed something buried in your own silence, don't let it stay buried. Pass it on. Talk about it. Write the version they never expected you to tell, because the world doesn't change when we stay quiet. It changes when we decide we were never ghosts to begin with.